Hello, everybody. I'm George from Ireland. Well, I'm talking about now the godly imp, Edward VI, the anniversary of his coronation. So he was 9 years old, the only surviving son of King Henry VIII. And he was crowned about a month after the death of his father, who his father is indeed interred at Windsor Castle. His father's corpse spent the night in the coffin at Sion House, London, which still stands. Supposedly some blood dripped out of the coffin and dogs licked it up, fulfilling some prophecy. But Edward VI is brought up by Jean Bellemin, was his French tutor. I can't remember who the other ones. I've wrote books about this. I need to publish it. So Thomas Cranmer was Archbishop of Canterbury, the one who'd married Henry VIII to Anne Boleyn bigamously, because even according to the Anglicans, he was still married to Catherine of Aragon at the time. And Thomas Cranmer preached a sermon at the coronation saying, "You're like Josiah, the boy king in the Bible, who brought about a religious reformation." And so that certainly affected him, the son of Jane Seymour, and his uncle was Edward Seymour, became Duke of Sussex, was the Lord Protector of the realm, as in to govern on behalf of his nephew because of the tenderness of the child's youth. Although he fell out with his uncle very badly, and then 2.5 years later there was this coup d'etat, and he was overthrown by John, it'll come to me, Dudley, and then Edward Seymour was executed for enriching himself of my treasure. He wrote this journal, Edward VI, and completely unemotional. I think as his mother died when he was 9 days old, his father died when he was 9 years old, the boy might transfer those filial feelings to his uncle, with the father figure of his life, but no. And rather heartless about his uncle being executed. Just very matter of fact, my uncle was executed, before 3 o'clock in the afternoon or something like that. And so you can see his homework, his handwriting, things like learning Latin and ancient Greek, but believed in driving the Reformation forward. Maybe he was going that direction anyway. Possibly Cranmer was persuading him because obviously the child's mind was not entirely his own. Iconoclasm to make the Church of England properly Protestant. Now, remember 20 years earlier, there'd been the dissolution of the monasteries, and almost every religious house in England and Wales been closed down. Some of ours in Ireland have been closed down. I went to a ruined Franciscan one in County Sligo, that's the west of Ireland, within the King's writ wouldn't run so much. So, but there was this sort of aperture where there had been education. And so to fill the vacuum, he ordered lots of schools to be founded. Repton, Shrewsbury, Sherborne, a few other well-known public schools. And lots of schools with Edward VI in the name. Most famously, King Edward VI School, Birmingham, and obviously a sister school across the road, King Edward VI School for girls. And there's a King Edward School anywhere in the United Kingdom. It's usually in honor of Edward VI. That was him. Okay, but he was not a sickly child, despite dying at the age of 16. Things that we want to try to maintain the peace. But formally saying, yes, the clergy are definitely allowed to wed, which hadn't been clear beforehand. Remember, his mother was Jane Seymour, who'd fallen victim to puerperal fever. Henry VIII's favourite wife, she's the one he's buried with because she gave him that precious son, and obviously the boy survived. Henry VIII had other sons, including with Catherine of Aragon, but who died in infancy, and indeed sons who were born outside of wedlock. Harry Fitzroy, born to one of his mistresses, and in order to try and keep him inside the Roman Catholic Church, the Pope at the time was Julius II, that even offered to sanction an incestuous marriage between Harry Fitzroy and Mary Tudor, the half sister, half brother getting married. Isn't that vile? So this is immoral, unless of course your father's very powerful, in which case it is moral. How come it's one rule for them and another rule for everybody else? But yeah, that didn't happen at the end. So who was Edward VIII going to marry? Well, he didn't marry because he didn't live long enough, because he could have married, but they were thinking about it, canvassing various candidates, but no Roman Catholics. Of course, the Catholic minority severely persecuted in England and Wales. The Reformation in Wales, for some reason, even more successful than in England. I'm not clear why. And then in Ireland, obviously, unsuccessful. The East Coast, the Church of Ireland established, but the Catholicism stayed on in most of the country. Majority of us still adhered to the Universal Church for reasons which are not entirely clear. I mean, partly just simply less governmental control the further you go from London, especially going overseas from Londinium, it being the centre of power. So then he caught this disease, tuberculosis, in the middle of 1553, only 6 years into his reign. And for some reason, he'd been immunosuppressed, and that's why he must have got tuberculosis, because you don't only get it if you're run down already ill with something else or malnourished or whatever. And then he realized he's dying, coughing up blood. And so John Dudley, the Duke of Northumberland, was effectively ruling the country on his behalf. So saying, well, why don't you choose Lady Jane Grey as your first cousin once removed, descendant of Henry VIII's sister and Charles, Duke of Brandon. Okay, so I will nominate her as my heir, write his will. These days, it's the gift of Parliament. It's not up to the monarch to change the line of succession. But then it was, because Henry VIII kept changing his mind about the line of succession. Obviously, it's going to be Mary Tudor. Then was it going to be Elizabeth? Then decided she was illegitimate because Anne Boleyn was sleeping around. Henry VIII falsely said. Then it's definitely going to be Henry VI. But if he dies, Mary Tudor brought back, maybe Elizabeth brought back, and so on. But the default setting was if Henry VI died, it would be his half sister Mary Tudor. Her legitimacy was less impeachable of that than Elizabeth I, who was declared a bastard. I don't mean that in the appropriate sense, but I mean born outside of holy matrimony, which in those days was heavily stigmatized. It's obviously ridiculous and grossly unjust. But anyway, he nominated her partly because she's an Anglican, Lady Jane Grey. And then the Duke of Norfolk said, well, make sure she marries my eldest son, Lord Guildford Dudley, and sees his way of continuing his control. And then he died in July 1558. Okay, and that was kept secret for a few days, and then 4 days. Why? He didn't appear in public because he's so ill in bed. Why did they keep it secret? Was it the Duke of Norfolk thought that he could gather his forces and so on and make sure that there was a coronation? And then she was proclaimed Lady Jane Grey as queen. But then, of course, Mary Tudor was in Norfolk, where she was proclaimed. She brought in reinforcements from the Netherlands, and she marched with the half-sister at its side, Elizabeth I, to London. And then people went over to her, the Privy Council, Parliament, and whatever. And Lady Jane Grey was arrested. She and her husband executed the following year. You should see the film about it, The 9 Days Queen, starring the 16-year-old Helena Bonham Carter, which is the age it was when she was top 15 when she wed that bloke and didn't have children. So that is Edward VI. So yes, though he was young, he had a fervent religious policy. I mean, I'm not a religious person, but we shouldn't be smashing churches and things like that. Okay, got to hand it to him for founding schools, and nobody should be persecuted for his or her religious denomination. I know this goes without saying, but that's not the way people proceeded 500 years ago. So, yeah, Henry VIII, unique in having 3 of his children sit upon the throne. So Henry VI, King of Ireland, King of England, and so forth, styled himself King of France, but only controlled a tiny portion of France, Calais and Tournai. Obviously, his half-sister Mary Tudor, who succeeded him, but for that interregnum of 9 days. She's the one who lost those territories and said, when I die, you shall find Calais engraved on my heart. So there was an idea that he might marry a French Protestant noblewoman, but it did not come to be. Okay, thanks for watching my channel. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon. Donate on PayPal, George Callahan, gmail.com. Goodbye. George Callahan79 at gmail.com. Toodle pip.